And a very good evening to you. Welcome to Lansdowne Church here at Woodbury Avenue. And well done on coming out on such a beautiful evening. It really is. The first one of summer. And let's enjoy. Good evening. I'm Peter Brown. I'm one of the elders here at Lansdowne. And this is one of our big questions evenings that many of you know that we hold on a monthly basis. This is actually the last one in the series for, before we restart again in September. And tonight's is going to be slightly different because in previous big questions evenings, we've always talked about real challenges to the Christian faith. This evening is slightly different perhaps, which is entitled Ecology, Is There Hope for Planet Earth? So really hopefully will be an informative evening that Miles will be able to enlighten us. And again, an opportunity to really chat through some of the issues on stewarding the planet. You know, references within the Bible of God's wonderful creation and our responsibilities to look after it. So hopefully this evening that will give us an opportunity to think and consider. So as I said, this is the last one before the summer. There are a number of events going on in the summer that I'll explain at the end of the evening. And before, of course, we start with Church on the Beach, which starts next month. So a number of occasions when we'll be down on the beach, as we've done in previous years, which have been just brilliant evenings and great opportunity to hold our services outside. So I'll welcome Miles up now. I'm going to do something a little bit different with Miles because
thanks.
Everyone, or most people, know Miles. But as I said, if we were to do 20 questions on him, I'm not sure that many people would get that many questions right. So just to recap, really,
okay.
How long have you been here? How long have you been at Lansdowne now?
I think it's coming up to maybe 10 years, I reckon. Yeah. Ooh, yeah.
Yeah, that because when you came down, you came as a single lad.
I did, yeah. So I was studying at Moorlands College down the road, and in my second year started attending Lansdowne. Yeah.
And then you went on from there to be a teacher.
That's right. So trained for teaching at Southampton Uni and taught, and all the time I was here, and then came onto the staff here a few years back. Yeah.
Because I remember you were at Twynham, weren't you?
During my training, yeah, that's right.
That's right. Yeah. And so you're Minister for Discipleship. You've been in that role here at Lansdowne for
some time. I was trying to think now. It must be at least a couple of years, 2 years, 3 years. And I've been, and before that I was Minister in Training. So all in all, about 4 years or so on the staff.
Yeah. And did you find the teaching, was that a step? Did you do that with a purpose to come into the ministry, but also have that training of being able to teach, or was that just something that you...
Yeah, I think finishing theological training, some people will go straight to working in a church, and I think my instinct was that I probably could be better prepared to serve people in a church if I'd had a bit of experience in an ordinary job, if you can call it that. People who teach probably know it's not an ordinary job, but you know what I mean. Yeah. And so the kinds of experiences you gain from that are really, really good. So that was part of the reason for choosing that. Yeah.
Great. So you're married to Kat,
that's
two
right.
Children.
Yes. Oh, Phoebe and Willow. I know their names. Yeah, that's right.
Well done. And they are ages?
Phoebe's 4, so she'll start school in September. Willow will be 2 in July.
Great.
So
busy with a young family, busy with your role here. Great. Well, it's a blessing to have you with us. Yeah. And so tonight's talk, Ecology, Is There Hope for the Planet?
Yes.
We're going to listen to you talk. There'll be the usual opportunities to feedback. From either texting the number on the screen or writing questions, and or actually we'll do a roving mic if there's some that actually want to ask questions. But I often hear with regards to recycling and green issues, a lot of people have different questions and they ask me about them. This is the opportunity tonight to bring them to the open and see where we stand in terms of our Christian faith with regards to stewardship. So, great. Thank you, Miles.
Thank you, Pete. And I must say, I'm not a scientist. I'm not like a professional ecologist or conservationist or environmentalist or anything like that. I'm a normal Christian who thinks these are important issues, and I want to talk to you from that context this evening. So whether you're a Christian here this evening, you're thinking through these issues for yourself, or perhaps you're just exploring what Christians think about these issues, you want to go a bit deeper with that and understand where we would be coming from. Hopefully that's going to be helpful for you. But what's certainly true is that these days, ecology is a really big issue that everyone's thinking about. I think there would have been a time maybe 20, 30 years ago when you could go from week to week without hearing anything on TV or in the papers about ecology. These days, though, it is everywhere, isn't it? Just open your papers and you'll find pretty much every day a story that is environmental or is to do with, as Pete was saying, recycling or climate change or rises in sea levels or extinction of species. This last week or so, the issue has been clean air, and you will have seen this probably on the news in London, talking about emission zones and what the policies from different parties are going to be on that and how they're going to deal with this. But people are asking these kinds of questions, and it's far more mainstream than it ever was. If you turn the clock back a little bit, back to the sort of late 60s, early 70s, this is when the sort of modern green movement was emerging. And so you had things like Greenpeace and Friends of the Earth were beginning. A little bit later on, in the 80s, the Green Party here in the UK started. But conspicuous by their absence often were the voices and the presence of Christians in this movement. So much so that one writer on these issues, Dr. Lynn White, he writes this in a paper that was called The Historical Roots of Our Ecological Crisis. He says, actually, Christianity is the most anthropocentric, that's a big word, I'm glad I managed to say it, I was wondering if I would, anthropocentric religion the world has ever seen. Basically, he's saying that Christianity is man-centered, that it's all about human beings. And so he develops the idea that human beings then use the resources of the world for their own goods. All that the world is here for is to source us with fuel and food and homes, and we use it and use it and use it as much as we need to until it's all gone. That was his idea of Christianity. And you might say that seems like an overreaction, but actually if you look around, you'll find all kinds of examples of people speaking a bit like this. Infamously, James Watt, who was the Secretary for the Interior in Ronald Reagan's administration back in the 80s, he said this when he was speaking on the topic of the environment. He said, God gave us these things to use. After the last tree is felled, Christ will come back. And the implications of that are vast, aren't they? He's saying that we use the environment, we chop down the trees, we mine the earth, we use up all the resources and pollute the ocean, and once everything's got really bad, then Jesus will come back and swap it in for a new earth, and everything's okay. Now, of course, that's an extreme example, but we see it time and time again. I think similar attitudes actually rose up again during the George W. Bush administration. We saw a lot of that, and lots of the environmental policies that were around in the States were ripped up during a supposedly Christian or overtly Christian administration. And so it seems as though Christians are perhaps to blame for some of the ecological problems that we face these days. But actually, that kind of thinking that we saw there doesn't come out of the Bible. It doesn't come from the source of Christianity. Actually, really, it comes from all kinds of ideas that have been imported into Christianity and have somehow got their claws into what Christians think. An example of this would be dualism. Dualism is the idea that the world is essentially spiritual and material. And spiritual is good, material, not so good. And so this idea kind of seeped into Christianity. It originally came from Plato, but it found its home in Christianity. So people began to think like that essentially a human being is spirit, and the spirit is locked inside the mortal body. And the hope, the salvation for a Christian is to be released from that prison of mortality, released from that prison of the material human being body and of this world, and to escape back to the spirit world. Now that sounds a little bit like a caricature of the Christian message, doesn't it? But a lot of Christians have thought like that. They've imbibed those kinds of views. And so it gives a very low view of the world, of the environment, of the other species that we share this planet with, if we think that material is of very little value, if it's subpar, and if spiritual is good. Another example of an idea that's kind of come in and has become very unhelpful, we saw it in what James Watt said in that quote I just read out to you. The idea that eventually when Jesus comes back, boom, the planet's going to be destroyed and replaced, swapped in for a new one. When actually consistently the Bible teaches not that the world is going to be replaced with another world, but that the world is going to be renovated, it's going to be renewed, it's going to be restored. It will be dramatic. It will be nothing like, in a way, the planet we have now in terms of quality, but it will be the same planet, renewed, restored. Now, I can see why people think that. There's a couple of verses in the Bible that would lead you in that direction, but actually read carefully and read with everything else that the Scripture says. Actually, the Bible has a very high view of this world that we live in. And so you take those kinds of imports and add to them things like the Protestant work ethic and industrialization and the scientific idea of progress, that every single problem the world has, there must be a human solution to it. And mix it all up, and you get that kind of distortion of Christianity that we heard about just there on the screen. Of course, the issue is far more complex than that, and the kind of landscape is very different to that. There are some Christians who, throughout history and even today, are doing incredible things to conserve the environment or to live lightly in this world. Celtic Christianity had a very healthy relationship with the planet. If you look today at groups like Arosha, which is a Christian environmental group, they're doing some fantastic work. Other development groups like Tear Fund do great work trying to address issues like climate change and other issues that affect the global poor. So there are Christians who are doing really good things today, who are taking seriously the responsibility to care for our planet. Also, it's worth noting that it's not just Christians who have a bad track record. I think all of us who are Christians here today have to hold our hands up and say that at times Christianity, the church, has done really badly at dealing with the environment. We've shirked our responsibility. But at the same time, this isn't limited to us. There are people of different faiths, no faith, who have just as bad a track record. I was thinking, just because it was in the news this week, of some Sri Lankan Buddhists who are being taken to court for cruelly keeping elephants captive. Now, I mention that because you often think of Buddhists having a sense of connection to the created order, ideas of reincarnation and the connectedness between all living things means that you'd assume that they would have a higher view of creation than maybe other people. But even there, you find examples of Buddhists who are doing these kinds of things, cruelly incarcerating animals. And the point there is not to point the finger at Buddhists and say it's all down to them, it's their fault. That would be ridiculous, wouldn't it? But also to say that it's not just Christians who are to blame for the ecological problems that we face. Actually, I think there's something deeper, more intrinsic to what it means to be a human that leads us down this route. I think actually our planet is in a mess because of human involvement, and we'll come back to that in just a moment. So if there are all kinds of different ideas outside of the Bible, extra biblical ideas that have shaped the way that Christians often think, what we really need to do is get back to what the Bible says on ecology, on the environment, on human beings and their relationship to the world in which they live. So that's where I want to take us now before we think a little bit about questions in a moment. So what does the Bible say about our planet and about the rest of creation? Well, of course, as Pete mentioned just at the start there, the Bible says that God created the world. It may seem like a simple thing to state, but God created the world. It's his. He made it. And he made it good. And that's a really important thing to hold on to. He made it good, and it was good on the first couple of days. It was good even before there were human beings there. And this actually chimes with a lot of the frustrations that the ecological movements and environmental movements have. The assumption that the world is just there to serve human beings, that if we can shape it into a tool or eat it or burn it for fuel or make it into a house, then it's useful and good, but if not, then it has no value. Well, actually, the Bible thinks differently to that. The Bible says that these things are good. They're good before human beings even set foot on the scene. God loves, just for its intrinsic value, he loves fish and he loves trees and he loves rivers and he loves mountains and oceans. God cares about these things. They're valuable to him intrinsically. And as well as that, human beings are created as part of that creation. Again, one of the things which often is pointed at Christians to say this is a bad view that you have of creation is to say that there's a kind of hubris. We think of ourselves above the rest of creation. But actually, the first thing we learn about human beings, before we learn anything about their role, which is different to other animals, is that they are like the other animals. They're created as part of the creation. And in that sense, human beings have more in common with the rest of creation than we do with our Creator. He's the one who's unique. He's the one who made everything else, and we're just a part of that. We belong to that community of creation. We're connected with other creatures and with our environment. It's no coincidence that when you read the book of Genesis in the original languages, the word Adam and the word for soil sound almost exactly the same, just the letters difference. The point is that we, humanity, are earthlings. We're from the earth. And so we need to recognize that we belong to this creation. But at the same time, of course, you read the early chapters of the Bible and we're told that we have a unique role, that human beings don't just sit within this environment like every other creature. Actually, we've got something that God has given us to do, and this is really important to get hold of. We're told that we are to fill this earth, to be fruitful, to multiply, but also to have dominion. And that word, again, raises eyebrows. For people within the green movement, to have dominion, it seems negative, doesn't it? But it's not to domineer, it's not to dominate, it's not to take advantage of, or to assume that everything is just there for our benefit. To have dominion means to carefully steward, to cultivate, to look after, to protect, to conserve. I think a really good image to have in your mind is the image of a gardener or of a farmer. That's really what is being imagined when we're told to have dominion. Human beings are to act like that. Now, you think of a good gardener, okay? They don't wreck the soil. They don't kind of tear up all the plants. They carefully kind of cultivate this plot that they've got to bring the very best out of it. They take the raw materials and they make something beautiful from it, something tasty. They rearrange what is there and they make something better. It's this idea of a gardener that we're supposed to think of when we think of the human's place within the world, not to wreck the world, but to beautify the world, to improve the world, to go on doing what God has already done in his place. That's the role that human beings are given. And this isn't just limited to people with green fingers. I don't have green fingers. I mentioned that last Sunday evening. I kill most plants by mistake, not on purpose. I'm not that way inclined. I'd like to grow things, but I'm awful at it. But actually, this idea of cultivation, it spreads into all kinds of different things that we might do. Really, it's key to what kind of good, useful work is all about. And so if you are an engineer, you're taking raw materials and you're reshaping them and reforming them to make something useful. If you're a poet, you're taking language and you're reshaping it to make something useful and beautiful. If you're a chef, you're taking food, raw ingredients, you chop them up and you saute and you kind of put them into a pie and make something nice that people enjoy eating. Right from the start, human beings were meant to do these kinds of things. And particularly with our environment in mind, we're meant to treat our environment like this. We're meant to cultivate, we're meant to beautify, we're meant to grow and cultivate. That's the idea. That's what dominion is all about. And so this isn't where the story ends. This isn't it. Humans aren't left in this beautiful creation, cultivating and beautifying, and having dominion over this world, ruling this world in a loving and a caring way. Something happens. Creation moves to decreation. And this is the second famous story of the Bible, the story of the fall. And in this moment when human beings rebel against God, what we find there in this part of the Bible story is that humanity's relationship with their God and also with the non-human creation is shattered. All those connections between us and our environment, us and other fellow creatures, us and our God are wrecked, they're broken, they're distorted at that moment. And so I think we see that in the world around us, don't we? We see a world that's full of beauty. It's full of glorious sunsets, incredible flowers, amazing creatures. We saw some of the stuff on the screen before that just makes you stop and your jaw drops seeing the kinds of animals that exist in our world, the kind of nature that has been created. But at the same time, there's a savageness, there's a brokenness, there's a sadness about our world, which is clear for anyone who just needs to open their eyes. And this is how the Bible describes it. But what is the cause? The cause, as I said a little bit earlier, I alluded to this, is not one ideology. It's not one set of doctrines. The cause goes much deeper. The cause is human selfishness and it's human pride. And I think here, again, there's an instinct that people have within the green movement that humanity's problem is selfishness, and that ecological problems flow from this. That actually the Bible speaks about and has spoken about for centuries and centuries, for millennia. The issue is human selfishness. There's a book I've been reading on this topic of ecology. It's quite ironic. The bloke who wrote it's called Dave Bookless. It's a funny name for a man who's written a book, isn't it? Anyway, but Dave Bookless writes a book on ecology. I recommend it, Planet-wise. It's really good. And he talks about the deep kind of rationale, or not the rationale, the reason for the ecological problems we face. And he says this: today, more and more people are recognizing that the environmental crisis is at root a spiritual crisis. We've damaged the world not only through inadequate information or poor decisions, but through selfishness. Every time we are too lazy to walk to the local shops or take the car, we make a spiritual choice to be selfish. We say no to treating the earth as if it really is the Lord's, it's God's. Whenever we buy cheap meat without asking whether the animal has been intensively or cruelly farmed, we show disrespect to God, the Creator. When we know the facts about energy wastage and the damage that excessive carbon dioxide does to the atmosphere, and yet carelessly leave the television on standby or lights on around the house, we're not only harming the planet, but also sinning against God and our fellow humanity. These are uncomfortable truths, and I know that I am often the first to fail in these areas. But what he's saying is that environmental issues go way deeper than we often think. And for those of us here who are Christians, actually they should be a part of our discipleship. They should be a part of our walking, following Jesus. That's what Christians are. They're followers of Jesus. And of course, this has big implications for us. So selfishness has a major effect on our world. Our selfishness continues to do that today, doesn't it, as we've seen in that quote. And this leaves us in a situation where creation is groaning. This is the language of the New Testament. Poetically, Paul, one of the writers in the New Testament, he says that the creation is groaning. It desperately longs for things to change, desperately longs for the world to be made right again. It's kind of locked up and longing to be set free. We'll come back to what it's going to be set free from in a moment. But I just wanted to point out one more thing before we move from the Old into the New Testament. And that's the way that God commands his people to live. You might think that things like the Ten Commandments and then the laws that follow after that are all about kind of moral things that you should or shouldn't do. But actually they're incredibly practical and incredibly grounded in the environment in which people live. And so you find laws like this, the year of the Sabbath year for the land. If you read in the book of Leviticus, you'll find laws about how on every seventh year you let the land have a rest. You let the land grow whatever it wants to grow. You don't farm it, you don't weed it, you don't till it, you don't do any of those things. And in that time, there's this beautiful image of humanity living lightly on the land and living in a way that works well with the rest of the environment. And so on that year, that Sabbath year, it talks about how the wild animals will come and eat from there, how the poor will come and find food in this field that you're leaving for a year. This kind of stuff happens all the way through the Old Testament. In the book of Deuteronomy, there's this incredible little law. It's so detailed, you wouldn't expect to find it in the Bible, where God says that if you are walking along a path and you find a bird's nest and it's fallen to the ground, how you should respond to that. That you don't just take the birds and eat them or fry the eggs, but actually there's a way that you can manage that situation that is basically Old Testament conservation. And God cares about these things, and he tells his people to approach nature and approach animals in this way. If you move forward to Proverbs, which is a book all about how to live wisely, it talks about how the righteous man cares for his animals, how he would, in these days' terms, feed them well and take them to the vets and look after them, how animals under our care should have good standards of living, and even animals we find along the road should as well. It surprises me, it surprised me originally to find these things in the Bible. You think it's all about who goes to heaven and who goes to hell and all that kind of stuff, when actually the Bible's remit is far wider and far more grounded and physical and material than you would expect. Anyway, the creation is groaning. It's longing for something better, because our world isn't perfect, is it? I think all the activity of the green movement shows us that the world is not as it should be. So what is the hope? Well, the hope for this planet, I think, begins with Jesus Christ. That may seem like a really strange thing to say, and so far we've been talking about climate change and pollution an extinction of species and the melting of the polar ice caps, how on earth does that have anything to do with Jesus? Maybe you're thinking, I'm just saying that because I'm a Christian, I'm in a church, and I'm giving a talk, so I'm supposed to mention Jesus. Is that me just name-dropping him so I can get on and talk about the other stuff that's more related to ecology? Well, I don't think so. Because as you read the New Testament, you hear about a world which groans, which longs for renewal, which longs to be changed. And then you see the story of Jesus, who died and rose again, whose body that was broken, that was eventually killed, is raised back to life again, renewed. And this for Christians is the beginning of what the Bible calls the new creation. Jesus comes back to life again, raised by the power of God, and he's different. He's still physical. He eats, he drinks, he goes to the beach, he hangs out with his friends, he does things that you and I do, but he's changed. He's no longer marred by death or suffering or pain anymore. And as the New Testament pans out, we see that Jesus is a foretaste in his resurrection life of what God is going to do in the whole of creation. That as things pan out, this is God's plan, not just for one person, not just for Jesus, but for everyone who trusts him and for the whole of this world. That the whole creation is going to be changed, is going to be restored, is going to be renewed, is going to be refreshed to be like Jesus, to experience something like what he experienced in his resurrection. And so as we come towards the end of the Bible, as we come to the final few pages, we get this picture of a new creation, of a world changed, of a world restored. And it sounds like this. Then I saw a new heaven and a new earth, for the first heaven and the first earth had passed away, and there was no longer any sea. There's a bit of confusing imagery here. Just stick with it and take from it what you can conceptualize. I saw the holy city, the new Jerusalem, coming down out of heaven from God, prepared as a bride beautifully dressed for her husband. And I heard a loud voice coming from the throne saying, "Look, God's dwelling place is now among people, and he'll dwell with them. And they will be his people, and God himself will be with them and be their God, and he will wipe away every tear from their eyes, and there'll be no more death or mourning or crying or pain, for the old order of things has passed away." And as this image expands, and as the kind of the viewpoint, as the camera pans out, and you get this view of the whole new creation, it's physical. It's full of food and drink and rivers and plants and trees. It's this beautiful world that I think every one of us longs for. A world refreshed. It feels new again. It feels the way that it should be. And as we read just there, it's no longer marred by death or pain or suffering. And so this is the hope that Christians have for this world. That exactly what happened to Jesus will happen to those who trust him and to the whole creation. So the question is, should we care for the environment? I think almost everyone these days would assume that the answer is yes, and I would agree with them. The answer is yes. But the question which we have to come back to then is why? What kind of rationale is there? What reason is there to care for this environment? And as with any big question like that, I think different worldviews offer different answers. But I'm not sure that any offers an answer as satisfactory as the Bible's, as compelling as the Bible's. Take, for example, those who say there's no God. They're convinced that the world is just kind of atoms and material stuff like we see around us. There's no God, there's no life beyond death. This is it. For them, I don't know if there really is a strong reason to care for the environment. You know, if actually all that history ever was one species fighting with another species, leveraging its environment to get one up and to survive. If it is just survival of the fittest, then apart from keeping ourselves alive, a self-serving kind of environmentalism, there's no real reason to care for what happens on the other side of the world or what happens beyond when I live. Now, I'm not saying that people who don't believe in God are not caring for the environment. I'm just saying I'm not sure there's a convincing reason from their worldview to think like that. But when you speak to a lot of people in the Green Movement, you'll find that actually they are quite spiritual people. And spirituality in the broadest sense. And so they'll probably draw from all kinds of different streams. Often that's the case. But one thing that often that kind of spirituality has in common, whether it's deep ecology or Buddhism or some other kind of pantheistic way of thinking or traditional religions, one thing it often has in common is the interconnectedness of everything. That you and me and that chair and this world and the bird that just flew across the window at the back, all of them are one. All of us are connected in some way. That I am it and it is me. And if there's a God in that kind of scheme of thinking, that God is in all of these things. That kind of thinking is quite prevalent. But actually, when you look at it, I think, again, it's hard to find a reason to care for the environment, a hard and fast reason. Because if I am you and you are me, then it's not just the nice things which are one, but everything is one. Cancer is one. People who do evil are one. And when you explore certain worldviews, for example, Buddhism, you find that actually death and suffering and extinction, they're not really the enemy. The enemy is desire. Kill desire and you've won. And so a lot of this philosophy and a lot of these worldviews don't present us with a strong reason to care for the environment. I think, though, that the Christian worldview, this kind of story that I've sketched out for you that comes from the Bible, is a good reason, a compelling reason, the best reason, I think, to care for this world that you'll find anywhere. A world that was created by God, created good, and he said, I love this world. Look after it. Human beings have been given the responsibility to care for this world in a way that no other creature has been given responsibility. And God's never revoked that. That responsibility is still something he expects of every human being. And of course, if we go from the beginning of things to the end of things, where is creation going? Where is this world going? Well, the end point is that Jesus is going to make everything new. That this world is going to be restored, refreshed, rejuvenated, replenished. And if that is God's aim for this planet, then any Christian who wants to follow him surely wants to make that happen. Wants to begin that work, foreshadow that work. Not that we'll complete it, but that should be our aim. And so for people who follow Jesus, people who live as disciples of Jesus, every act of conservation, every act of curating and cultivating this world, it becomes an act of foreshadowing the work of Jesus in the age to come. One thing that I didn't mention is that in the new creation, Jesus is ruling. Now, for me as a kind of 21st century, postmodern kind of infused person as I am, I think that's what we're brought up to be, aren't we, in this world? I think of ruling as a really bad thing. I kind of recoil from it. Any sort of sense of authority or whatever, just naturally it goes against the grain for people who've grown up in the culture that I've grown up in. But the idea of ruling that you find in the Bible and that you find here in the end of the Bible is a beautiful thing. It's Jesus really doing what human beings were always meant to do, having dominion in that wonderful sense, taking care of this world, cultivating this world, growing and developing and beautifying this world, so that it goes from where it is, and through harnessing the raw materials, things go from better to better to better to better. Not stamping down on this world, not stripping every asset of this world and destroying this world like so often human beings do, but carefully stewarding it, lovingly curating this world to make it a thing of beauty. That's what Jesus does. And you see that those who are with Jesus in this new creation do it too. So that's the hope for Christianity, in Christianity for this world. That although this world is broken, although this world isn't what it should be, actually Jesus one day will make it right. And we will share with him in making that world an even more beautiful place than it was in the start, as we rule and have dominion in that place. Now, I don't know what that makes you think of. There's probably a few questions you want to raise. There might be really practical questions about how we should care for the environment. I might be able to answer some of them. I might not have the expertise to answer all of them, but I'll give it a go, and we'll see how we go. We're going to have a little break now, and then Pete's going to come up and introduce our Q&A time. Yeah. Do you want to explain what we're going to do, actually? Sorry.
So we're just going to have 5 minutes. Short video will be on the screen. If you just think through some of your questions, the number's on the screen. You've got the little handouts on your chairs as well, if some have got questions there. If you just put your hand up once you've done it, and the stewards will pick those off from you. And we've also got a roving mic as well for those who are brave enough to answer the questions on a one-to-one and challenge Miles face-to-face. So, we'll have a few minutes break now, and then we will resume. Thank you. more coming in? I did actually think in introducing Miles, I ought to say, I'm Mr. Brown and this is Mr. Green. But I thought that was funny. Okay, we've had a few questions in, and if we just, we'll run through these.
Yeah.
Good, it's got people thinking about the green issues. The first one we've got, Miles, do you think people link green issues with New Age beliefs and worshipping creation itself? And as such, do you think Christians are turned off by this?
I wonder if that might be part of the issue. Obviously, I can't speak for every Christian who's ever thought about these, but I think there's probably something in that, isn't there? That often there seems to be a connection with people who have a real concern for the environment, and either it will be spiritual things like New Age, and you were saying kind of maybe an interest in Buddhism or kind of traditional religions or witchcraft or whatever it might be. Those things sometimes have connections, or it might be particular political issues as well. So if you think about the Green Party in this country, it's a left-wing party. Left-wing for you, my left, your left. It's a left-wing party, and so some people will have and it'll have other views on different issues like, I don't know, drugs or LGBT issues, and so some people will find it hard to tease apart those different issues. I think, though, for Christians, we should certainly have a concern for the environment. It should go back to the beginning of Genesis. It should be our reading of the Bible and understanding that God cares about these things, and so we should as well. And I think it is important to make the distinction that we don't worship creation, but we worship the Creator and value the creation because it's His. So I think if we can get those categories right, then I think Christians should be the most concerned for the environment of all the people walking around this town today. But I think sometimes we fail to do that. Yeah,
we're too risk averse, aren't we, to think, oh yes, we need to get involved in green issues in case people think, or I get drawn into other issues about it. That's a possibility.
And I think a wider issue for Christians is always guilt by association, and we're concerned in all kinds of areas of life that if we take an interest in this, then we might be considered fringe in kind of all kinds of areas. So, I mean, guilt by association kills a lot of things for Christians. I think we steer clear and we're a bit reserved, so you're right, yeah.
And that was really, that's exactly what the second question, we've already covered it. How far do you consider the Green Party is taking a lead in caring for the environment? So they are, but...
Well, no, you're right. I think so often it is those who don't... I mean, obviously there are Christians within the Green Party, but generally it's not a party that's often supported by Christians for all sorts of reasons. I'm not suggesting... This isn't saying go and vote Green or anything like that, but I think often it's people who have less of a Christian worldview who are taking a lead on these things. And really, if we believe what we believe about the Bible and about God's concern for the planet and His command to us to care for it and to have dominion over it, then we should be the ones who are taking the lead. And so you should have Christians of all different political persuasions with a conviction that the planet is important and that we need to care for species and the environment. Yeah, I agree. Yeah, I think that it's a failure on the part of Christians that we haven't done better on that. Yeah.
A slightly diverse question. You say we are part of this world and have our place here. What are your thoughts on the push to leave it, space travel, etc.?
Space travel. I knew the space travel issue. No, I didn't really. I was not expecting. I don't have a strong view on space travel. I've never been particularly. I don't know. That's a very interesting question. My gut instinct is that I suppose we probably won't get to a point where we need to all leave and set up camp on Mars, and we're a little way off from that at the moment, so it's not a pressing issue. But yeah, I don't know. I don't think this is a question I wasn't expecting. I think there's nothing wrong with space travel. There may be better ways to use money sometimes than space travel, but I have no major theological grounds for disagreeing with space travel. Is that okay? Good.
If such things as leaving lights on and driving a short distance are a sin, is killing insects and other animals a sin?
Very interesting. I didn't use the word sin. I said it is selfish, and I think there probably is. I think it's probably only only God really who can figure out when a person is sinning and when they're not. And I think there's all kinds of things that govern that. I think we need to be serious about those things, though, and I think often we don't take seriously those little changes. I think actually little changes are really all we can do as individuals. We won't be able to turn back the effects of humanity on the earth in a generation or as individuals. We can do little things, though, can't we? Make small choices. And they may seem a bit like a token, but I think God recognizes those. So I wouldn't want to belittle those things. Interesting question, though, about killing any sort of life. In the Bible, killing of animals doesn't seem to happen in the first few chapters, and it's after Noah that it's kind of as a... is put in there as an option that we can kill to eat. My take on things is that human life is more important to God than other animal life and plant life. So I think there'll be situations where, killing an insect or killing an animal preserves or protects human life. And there'll be times where we kill to eat. Now, whether that is the best, I've been wondering about this, and I don't have a strong kind of answer either way, whether vegetarianism is the kind of best, or God's kind of best for us that he had in the beginning that we should go back to, or whether we just have a new norm now after the flood and Noah, and that eating meat is perfectly acceptable, and that's cool with God. And then what that will mean for the new creation. Those are questions that I'm still wondering about. So what does that answer the question? Not exactly. Human life, I think, is more significant and is more important than other forms of life. But we shouldn't take that to the extent that some Christians have, where other life is unimportant altogether and doesn't matter. And so we treat it kind of just as something that we can use for ourselves. So I think taking of any life is not a good thing, but I wouldn't go as far as Francis of Assisi. Yeah.
So we should consider swatting a wasp.
We should consider swatting a wasp. I think that's okay.
Rather than...
Yeah, I wouldn't consider that sin. I couldn't point to a chapter and verse, but that's my hunch. Yeah.
Okay. Have we got any roving mic questions that people would like to ask? One down here.
Space travel and wasps. I wasn't expecting that.
Yeah, this is kind of another one of the out there questions, almost as weird as space travel, which was obviously one of the big scientific developments of the last few decades has been sort of stuff with genetics and the possibilities of sort of de-extinction of things like passenger pigeons or dodos and other things that have become extinct due to human action. And it's sort of, where does that sort of interplay with what God's plan is and stuff like that?
Yeah, so de-extinction through genetics, that's very interesting. I think obviously there's lots of things which are possible to us now as human beings which were not even imagined by the authors of the Bible. So the people who wrote Genesis, or the person who wrote Genesis, didn't even imagine that these things could be done. And so I think with any advance in technology, we just need to tread carefully, I think. That's always sensible. I think we need to think very carefully about the implications of that. I suppose in some cases, I mean, I haven't really thought through much with this sort of thing, but I guess if there are things which through human intervention have been killed off, then maybe to be able to bring them back into the environment, a bit like reintroducing, I don't know, animals into their native environment after they've been pushed out of it. It's a step beyond that. I would do that with caution, but I wonder if there's room for that. It seems of all the different sort of technologies and things that we've come up with and scientific advances, that's quite a positive one in terms of stewarding the world. But I don't know. I mean, I think as Christians, we just have to be careful and think through the implications of those sorts of advances before we take the plunge with that kind of thing. But it's very interesting, yeah. We'll talk more afterwards. I'd like to know a bit more, yeah.
Thanks, Miles. We got any others? One over here.
Oh.
What about weeds? What should we do about weeds?
About weeds, yeah. What should we do? This has suddenly turned into gardener's question time. Greenfly as well. It's interesting, isn't it? So if you read through the story of the fall, what you find is that the creation is good, and then certain things change after that full story happens. And one of those things is that Adam's work, which is essentially agriculture, becomes a lot harder. And so thorns and thistles and weeds and those kinds of things, I wonder if they're that kind of thing. that actually his work becomes difficult, and things which will kind of have little spikes that will prick him, and weeds which make his work hard, and it's not a joy anymore to work. Work is cursed. And so I would say that probably those are part of the fullness of creation, the brokenness of creation, and that hopefully we won't see weeds in the new creation, which would be great. So as Christians, I think we have no crisis of conscience for pulling out a weed. There's no problem with that. We should be encouraged to do so. But some weeds look quite nice. I'm told they're weeds, but I didn't realize they were. Yeah.
Thanks, Miles. Now, an issue that certainly I've heard before, and the question is, if God is going to make it all new anyway, and restore, why bother recycling?
Yeah. No, I think that's a very good. I'm really pleased someone raised that, because I think that's actually one of the most common objections that Christians will say. Well, why bother? And it's not too far off from let's burn up all the trees, and then when they're gone, God will make it new. And so why worry about driving a car with high emissions? Why worry about taking lots of holidays on planes and kind of spitting gases into the atmosphere? Why worry about kind of the effect on other animals and things, if God is going to fix it all in the end? I suppose an analogy to that would be for Christians who expect that when Jesus comes back, they will be morally changed and they will be perfect in a way that they aren't now. Now, it would be strange, wouldn't it, for a Christian to say, well, you know what, one day I'm going to be perfectly sinless, so I'm going to get all my sinning out of the way now. I'm going to enjoy doing all the things I'm not supposed to do now, and I'm not going to worry too much about how I behave. If God says, don't lie, I'm going to lie as much as I need to now, because one day I'll be sorted out and I won't be lying anymore. If God says, don't cheat or don't sleep around or whatever it might be, I'm going to do it as much as I feel like now, because one day he'll sort it all out. Now, that kind of makes your stomach turn if you're a Christian, doesn't it? So if God's intention for the planet is to make the planet new, to restore it and to refurbish it, then surely we'd want the same for it now, and we'd work towards that. I think it's the same as we'd view ourselves, and we'd say, well, if that's where God is taking me, then I want to pursue that now, even though I won't get there fully. And if that's where God is taking the planet, I want to pursue that now, even though I won't fully achieve it now. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. Yeah, so that would be my take on it. I think as a Christian who's thought these things through, and sometimes wondered about the same things. When you want to get in the car, you can't be bothered to walk, or you want to kind of not walk all the way to the recycling bin rather than kind of to the other bin that's just there. You know, those sorts of things. It takes time and it takes energy and it takes sometimes money to have a concern for these things. It's inconvenient often. And so that's why it's an act, I think, of discipleship for Christians as they think about what it means to follow Jesus in relation to the planet and the environment.
So it's sharing those concerns as well, isn't it?
Yeah. I think if that's God's concern, full stop, then it should be our concern now, even if he's going to bring it fully to completion later.
Because I sometimes hear when people say that, it doesn't, recycling, for instance, it all gets chucked in landfill anyway. But regardless, it's our attitude, isn't it, which is important in that we are concerned, rather than, yes, we've got no control sometimes over the end product, if you like, but it is how we feel and that we want to look after the planet and steward it well.
Yeah, I think it's interesting, isn't it, our concern, because I think often people will say, oh, well, I don't know if it's renewable energies or it's recycling or whatever it might be. They have questions over the technology or questions over the process or the effect that it's going to have. I think as people who follow Jesus, I suppose what we need to do is make sure that we're doing things for the right reasons, and that if we choose to recycle, we choose to recycle because we want to honor this earth that God has entrusted to us. Now, we might find out 20, 30, 40 years down the line that all our efforts were a waste of time. But God recognizes the decisions that we've made and the heart that we have for these things. And so I think, the motivations that we have, it becomes an act of worship or an act of disobedience, doesn't it? If we choose to do these things or not, I think it's into that category. And so we need to think about it in those terms rather than just something that's disconnected from our faith. Yeah.
Now, an interesting area that we didn't cover really in the talk was fair trade. Do we think it's important to care for people by buying from fair and sustainable sources?
Yeah. Maybe linked to the previous thing, because I want to kind of head off at the pass, I suppose. Some people will say, well, fair trade doesn't work, or fair trade isn't all that fair, or that there are better ways to ensure kind of a good deal for the growers or the people kind of in the supply chain along. That may be the case. You know, I'm not an economist. I'm not an expert in these things. There's other people who could comment probably with more authority. I suppose as a Christian, what you have to do is say, well, I want to be responsible in the way that I source things, whether it's food or clothing or whatever. I want to do that in a way that honors the people that God has made, who I'm buying from or who are producing these things. I want to do it in a way that is responsible and deals with the planet in a sustainable way. And so if when you do a bit of research and you look into it, the best way seems to be fair trade, then I'd say then that's the direction it leads you down. Take that route. If you find, because you're an expert in these things, that there's a better way to ensure that, and you genuinely think that'll be better for the people who are producing these things, then follow that route. I'm not an expert in these things, like I said, and so I'm not perfect in these areas either, so I do try to buy fair trade in certain products. I probably don't do it as much as I should, but the reason I do it is because I want to have God's heart for the people who are producing these things and try to make the best decisions as a consumer. They probably will be found to be not perfect, kind of as time goes on, and we'll see that there's better ways to do things. But I'd rather try to have the rights and the welfare of the growers at heart when I make these decisions than not bother. I think that's probably what God calls us to. Yeah.
The other questions we've got, we've either briefly covered or that they're not really green issues. So really I wanted to just finish with the last one, which is to say, after what we've heard tonight, what should we do as individuals, do you think, and collectively as a church? What should we take away from this?
I suppose for individuals here, it'll be 101 different things, won't it? We'll all have different ways that we could apply this. I think what's really hit me as I've been working through this, because it's not a topic that you often get asked to speak on. It's not one that I've given loads and loads of study to. But as I've been reading books on this, I've become convinced that the world is God's world, that he loves this world, that he is heartbroken when he sees the world damaged and violence done against the world, and that God's plan for this world is to restore it and to make it right again. That's the kind of arc, the narrative arc that the Bible takes for the planet and for the environment. And so for each of us, I think that just means stopping and reflecting on our usage of things, on the effects that we have, on our patterns and our habits in our lives, and just thinking what that might mean. It could be in terms of recycling if we don't do that. It could be in terms of the way that we get around and thinking more about walking or cycling if we're able to. There's 101 different things that we might choose to do. It might be having one less foreign holiday per year, or anything like that. There's lots of ways that we could have less of an impact, tread a bit more lightly on this earth, because I think that's what God has in mind. And I'm not saying that we all have to. Gareth's taken his shoes off this evening. He had a painful shoe, and we don't have to walk around like hippies with no shoes on and kind of grow ponytails and do those kinds of things. We don't have to dramatically change the sort of person that we are. But I think if we are concerned for the things that God's concerned for, I think a big gap in Christian thinking has been a concern for the environment. And I think we need to take that seriously. And it probably means a bit of reflection just as an individual. I can't tell you exactly what you should go away and do. It's probably not one thing, but there's plenty we could do. And as a church, I think we should be seen to do that. There'll be people who'll walk in and out this building all the time. Some of them will be Christians, some won't. And they'll have a real concern for the environment. And they'll be shocked to see that perhaps there are Christians who don't. And so I think there's simple things we could probably do as a church, which would signal that we're serious about this world and that we want to do all we can corporately to protect the environment and to conserve what God has entrusted to us as humans and as Christians. So, I mean, nothing specific there, but I think hopefully each person could give some thought to it and make some specific changes. Yeah.
Miles, that's great. And this evening has given us the opportunity really to raise the profile of God's creation and how we can go forward and take more care of it and think about it, individually and collectively. And I hope that's been useful. And as we go away and reflect. Now, this, as I said to you, is the last one of the big questions that we are hosting in this series. We've now got the summer break not a break, but a change where we will have the beach services, I think, on starting from next month, June, July, August, and we will resume Big Questions again in September. We've also got a number of events that are taking place during the summer on Thursday evenings, which include a quiz night. I think we're doing a coffee tasting evening, plus a number of other different events that are going on. So certainly it'll be different over the summer, and hopefully things that will be enjoyable and challenging. So I hope you found the Big Questions series interesting, challenging, informative. I know a lot of people have come along to church from outside and have found it very, very useful. So thank you to Miles as well for stepping up and getting involved. Perhaps in an area that, as you said, you don't do a lot of research into, or you don't do a lot of reading or speaking on it. Yeah. So it's useful, for Miles to do that and for us to hear. If you've got any questions, do come and chat to Miles, myself, or some of those with the Big Questions labels on them. If there's anything we can help you with at church. But it's just to really thank you for this evening. Thank you for coming along. We've got more cake and tea and coffee in the room next door. Please stay, chat, get to know each other, and enjoy what's left of today. So thanks again. Thanks for coming.